Native families from nations across the continent gather at the Dance for Mother Earth Powwow in Ann Arbor, Michigan. In a high school gym full of color and song, they dance, sell beadwork and books, and celebrate friendship and heritage. They will meet far distant relatives, shadowy spirits, and sometimes each other, plus one scrappy Rez dog. And most importantly, they will share their stories. I am reading to you today from Ancestor Approved, the short story collection. And my selection today is from Rez Dog Rules by Rebecca Roanhorse. While there were many things that Ozzy appreciated about being a Rez dog, there were exactly 3 that were the absolute best. Number 1, no masters. It was a provable fact that Rez dogs, by definition, had no masters. In fact, one of the defining qualities of the Canis liberatus reservatus, as he and his kin were known in Latin, was a lack of human-imposed rules. Ozzy was his own dog, and the only laws he followed were those of nature, who told him when to eat, when to sleep, and when to lift his leg on a convenient tree. Ozzy was as free as any living creature could be. Sure, it was lonely sometimes, especially on rainy nights, when all the humans and their pets were warm and cozy inside, and Ozzy was stuck outside, making do with whatever shelter he could find. And he sometimes wondered what his life would be like if he lived in one of those houses with 4 walls and a roof, and warm cuddles from a human child. But overall, he was content because he knew nothing was as warm and comforting as freedom. He was a canine, majestic and untamed, and he preferred it that way. Number 2, no leashes. It would logically follow that a dog who would abide no master would also not tolerate a leash. Ozzy was proud to say that he had never succumbed to the tyranny of wearing a leash, a harness, a gentle lead, or any other human-created restricting device. He firmly believed in unencumbered movement. Ozzy went where he wanted, when he wanted. Mostly on 4 feet, but it was not unheard of for him to catch a ride in the bed of an old pickup truck when he had to get across town in a hurry. He imagined himself roaming the mesas like his ancestor, the wolf, and he felt proud of his heritage. Number 3, Mrs. Cruz's back porch on Sunday afternoons. While it was true that Ozzy would never wear a leash and had no human he called master, he was very fond of Mrs. Cruz. She was by nature a kind and generous woman, and the best human Ozzy knew. She had raised 3 children and many more grandchildren in the little adobe house on the southern edge of the pueblo of Owinge in New Mexico, the place Ozzy called home. Mrs. Cruz's house had passed down through her family for generations. It was filled with a lot of pride and laughter. It was also occasionally filled with fried chicken, and Mrs. Cruz, never one to waste, would often give any leftover fried chicken she had to Ozzy, along with any other scraps of tamales, refritos, pastelitos, and calabacitas if he showed up on Sundays, just after the children and grandchildren had been stuffed full of Sunday lunch and piled into their cars and trucks to head back to their own homes. He and Mrs. Cruz would sit together on the back porch, watching the setting sun as she picked the bones out of the chicken and fed him the meat by hand. It was, in a word, heaven. So it was quite worrisome to Ozzy when, from his perch on the back patio just outside the kitchen screen door, he overheard Mrs. Cruz talking to her eldest grandson, Marino, about having to give up the house. They were sitting at the kitchen table, enjoying a late cup of coffee and eating the last of the prune pastelitos. "Maybe it's time I pass it to your father," Mrs. Cruz said, sadness tinging her voice. "No, Grandma," Marino said, distressed. "This is your home. Dad would say so too. It wouldn't be the same if you weren't here." "But this house needs so much work," Mrs. Cruz said with a heavy sigh. "The roof leaks, the foundation needs fixing, and I need to have someone take a look at the well. I think it's going to run dry soon." "I can help fix things around the house," Marino said. He took a sip of his pinon-flavored coffee. He was a nice grandson and Mrs. Cruz's favorite. He was short and wide, only a few inches taller than his grandmother, with a thick thatch of black hair and mischievous brown eyes. Ozzy knew he was always quick to offer someone a ride to town in his old truck or to haul wood for the elders, and he had never heard an unkind word spoken about the young man. "Oh, Marino," Mrs. Cruz said, "I wish you could, but what I need is a bit of money." When she spoke, Ozzy could hear tears in her voice. "I don't even think I can afford my electric bill this month." And this has been a preview of Ancestor Approved.